The Fate anime series is not an easy one to get into at all. Since its start in 2004, Fate as a franchise has grown to an overwhelming proportion, with over 104 different sequels, prequels, spin-offs, visual novels, light novels, video games, gacha games, stage plays, manga, and anime alone. That's not taking into account all of Kinoko Nasu, the author of Fate's other separate series that are canon to the Fate universe as well for some reason. With a timeline so convoluted, a watch list so long, it can be almost impossible for newcomers to know where to start, since there is no such thing as Fate 1, Fate 2, or Fate 3. Instead, we have titles like Fate/School Life, Fate/Caelid Linear, Fate/Guda Guda Order, and my personal favorite, Fate/Grand Order Epic of Remnant Subspecies Singularity, the first malignant quarantined demonic realm Shinjuku, a series of its own that has 4 different sequels and 1 spin-off, all of which are currently still being made at the same time somehow. Except for the second one, that's finished, so eat your heart out, I guess. To make matters worse, you can't just start from episode 1 of literally anything, because every single Fate anime comes with its own mile-long list of pros and cons. If you watch this series, you spoil that series, but if you don't watch this series, you spoil the same series, but if you watch this series, you don't know what's going on in this series, then you spoil the other series for yourself, then yada yada yada. So most people just write Fate off as too confusing for their liking, never really giving it a proper chance, and for the longest time, I was one of those people. Believe me, I wanted to get into Fate. I wanted to see what all the hype was about, but whenever someone gave me a starting point, 100 Fate fans would materialize out thin air to say, this person is wrong, my completely different order is the right one. And that's just how things were for a long time. Till one day, I finally decided to put my foot down. I was going to jump into the Fate series wherever I saw fit, hoping for the best, since starting somewhere is better than starting nowhere. At least then I could know whether Fate was actually worth my time or just an overhyped trash fest. Unfortunately, the place I chose to start was the worst possible one, but through sheer willpower and perseverance alone, I was able to trudge through all the filth, till I discovered a series like nothing I've experienced before in my life. Before I move on, I just wanted to note that this video will have major spoilers for all the Fate Stay Night adaptations. I also say, as much as I'm going to criticize this series, I still loved it and want to see more of what Fate has to offer, as it feels like I've barely scratched the surface. So comment down below on what Fate related thing I should watch next, and who knows, maybe I'll make a part 2 to this video one day. I also apologize in advance for anything I get incorrect lore wise, feel free to correct me in the comments. Without further ado, this is my journey down the Fate rabbit hole.
What a heavy day!
Speaking of embarking on exciting journeys, just like we do in the complex world of Fate, it's all about finding those special elements that enhance our experiences. This brings me to today's sponsor, 21 Sailors. They're not your ordinary brand. They create original anime merchandise that's crafted exclusively by real artists, no AI involved. Just pure artistic talent bringing anime worlds to life. I recently had the pleasure of receiving a t-shirt from 21 Sailors. I was genuinely impressed by the quality and artistry. It's not just merchandise. It's like wearing art with a story-rich background. Their collections span from t-shirts to various collectibles, each inspired by the rich and diverse world of anime. For all my anime fans out there, and especially my Fate enthusiasts, there's good news. If you use the link in the description, not only do you get a 10% discount on your purchase, but you also support this channel. So if you value genuine, artistic created merchandise and want to support real artistic talent, check out 21 Sailors. It's a great way to enhance your collection while supporting the community. Now, let's jump back into the mesmerizing universe of Fate. As I mentioned earlier, the biggest problem that the Fate series has is the community not being able to agree on an actual starting point for newcomers. While all Fate fans do is bicker and argue on Reddit, newcomers will look elsewhere to get their answer. That's when news sites such as Popverse, CBR, Radio Times, and Game Rant come to welcome them with a more unanimous answer. That being the Fate Stay Night 2006 anime by Studio Dean. If you think about this logically, it makes sense. The Fate 06 anime adapts what kicked the series off, the original Fate Stay Night visual novel released all the way back in 2004. For those unaware, a visual novel is essentially an interactive picture book. Text will appear on screen with respective drawings to illustrate what takes place, often with voice acting, sound effects, and background music. While they are technically video games as you can find them on all major consoles and PC, most don't consider them traditional video games, since the only real gameplay found in visual novels is just clicking a single button over and over again to continue. Scoff at it all you may, but I don't think most people realize how long visual novels are, with Fate Stay Night being a 60+ hour commitment if you want to stick it through to the end. Unsurprisingly, most people do not want to do that. So Studio Dean came into bat with their 2006 Fate Stay Night anime, an adaptation that was supposed to carry all the elements that made the visual novel great, but in a much more digestible way. So I can see why all these major publications would mark this as the starting line for newcomers, since it technically was the starting line. While things are a lot more complicated than that, as I'll get to later, these major publications are dead wrong. That's because Studio Dean is one of the most infamous companies in the anime industry, specifically because of how objectively bad their adaptation of Fate Stay Night is. I am not exaggerating when I say Fate 06 is the worst anime that I have ever seen. I had to force myself to sit through 26 episodes of this unbelievably confusing snooze fest, just to illustrate how boring this anime is. While I was watching it on my TV, I decided I might as well transfer some files on my laptop to my external hard drive for editing another video. I realized that watching this little loading bar bounce from left to right was more entertaining to look at than anything happening in Fate 06. I think that this is because Fate is an extremely exposition heavy series, but that's almost a requirement with how deep its lore runs. This will result in waves upon waves of dialogue, dedicated to explaining just the bare basics so you can actually know what's going on. This is par for the course with visual novels, a medium of storytelling that is almost entirely text-based, so lots and lots of dialogue is to be expected. The problem when adapting this over to anime is there's nothing more boring than long drawn-out exposition dumps, since it can make your anime feel like it's constantly interrupting itself. Even if an audience is initially invested in the lore, they will inevitably get overwhelmed if you expect them to retain every single bit of information. People came to watch an anime, not a narrated Wikipedia article. So how does Studio Dean decide to adapt exposition? Well, the funny thing is, they don't. Fate 06 might as well have been a visual novel, as all the characters do is try and drill lore into our brains. I swear, half of the series is just people waiting in line for their turn to drone on about their magic, holy grail, ideals, etc, etc. This happens in the middle of fights, in the middle of fleeing from danger, in the middle of a joke, and even our protagonist's dreams serve as exposition dumps. It was just never-ending waves of poorly paced information. So much so that halfway through Fate 06, I honestly just stopped listening. I mean, if the anime wasn't going to make any attempt to keep me interested in its lore and world, then why should I care? Why should I give a crap about any of these characters if they're just walking, talking speech bubbles, designed only to be interactable NPCs for our thick-headed main character, Shiro Emiya. Shiro is as if every shonen protagonist spat into a petri dish in order to birth the most cliche anime character in existence. Then he was raised in a sterilized lab so that nothing ever dares to make him likable in any way, shape, or form. Orphaned after a mysterious fire that left the majority of Fuyuki destroyed, Shiro was adopted by a just as mysterious man named Kiritsugu Emiya. Kiritsugu was always sickly for some reason, so right before he died, he told Shiro about his failed life's goal: to be a hero of justice. So Shiro made a promise to carry on his late father's wishes, to one day bring peace to the world so that nobody ever has to die. He aims to achieve his goal at any and all costs, even if it means doing some insanely stupid stuff. If you tied 5 people to a train track and made it so that all one has to do to stop them from getting pancaked is simply pull this lever, Shiro would not do that. Instead, he would jump in front of the speeding train, attempting to body block the locomotive, killing himself and the 5 people. He jumps in front of a lot of things in Fate 06, such as jumping in front of a sword swing to protect someone who would have been fine either way, almost dying for no reason at all. But as long as Shiro can blindly serve others without even considering if it's actually helping people in any way, he doesn't care, since Shiro gets to remind people that his dad died, and he aims to be a hero of justice for the 100th time. Luckily, he has a chance to finally prove himself during the 5th Holy Grail War. a battle royale style tournament in which 7 different mages are chosen to be masters. As masters, they have the ability to summon servants, people or myths from real world history who must fall into one of the 7 different types of classes. They are resurrected in the modern day to fight for their masters in the Holy Grail War. Shiro is able to land a servant who falls under the Saber class. She just calls herself Saber, as giving her identity to Shiro might jeopardize their chances in the tournament. All they have to do is kill everyone else to win the Holy Grail, a magical device that can grant any wish one desires. So now picture what type of series you think Fate 06 is. If you said a battle action fantasy series, you would be dead wrong, because as it turns out, it is a harem rom-com filled to the brim with questionable perverted jokes involving teenagers. We also have our classic set of love interests that are all falling left and right for our protagonist, like Sakura Mato, the sweet and innocent childhood friend who's known Shiro longer than anybody else. At this point, she's more like a younger sister to him than anything, much to her dismay. You can't help but feel bad for Sakura whenever some other girl takes Shiro away, as all she can really do is be a cardboard cutout and cook our gang meals. She's pretty unimportant to the overall story, except for when she almost gets sacrificed. The second girl is Rin Tosaka, who falls under the tsundere archetype, meaning that she has a mean-spirited exterior, but a lot kinder once you get to know her. Rin is the biggest victim of Studio Dean's poor handling of exposition, since her full-time job is being a human encyclopedia on all things magic-related, explaining whatever context is needed to progress the story. But Rin has no time to be a typical love interest, since she has to constantly bicker with her own servant, Archer, who spends most of Fate 06 dying, though he at least has the coolest character design in the series. But the final and only girl for Shiro's heart ends up being Saber, the 35-year-old woman trapped in a 15-year-old's body. Shiro is 17. One of the biggest mysteries in Fate 06 is the truth behind Saber's identity, and it's not revealed until late into the show that she's actually the legendary King Arthur, who once ruled over Britain 1500 years ago. Fate 06 finally does something interesting for once in playing with our limited knowledge of history. In real life, we do not know if King Arthur actually existed or not. Making him a woman who is only misgendered due to historical inaccuracies is pretty cool. While sure, it may have only been because Kinoku Nasu wanted a pretty poster girl to help push sales, I think it also helps build Saber's mystery throughout Fate 06, one of the only things that I was actually invested in. Though what intrigued me was that Saber only sees her kingship as a regret, blaming herself for the fall of Britain. In her last moments in life, she made a contract with the higher forces of the Fate universe, a contract to become a servant with the opportunity to obtain the Holy Grail and have a chance to fix her mistakes. Summoned in an endless cycle of suffering, used by countless people as a weapon, with only the slight chance that her pain will have been worth it. Saber does this for so long to the point where it's the only thing she ever knows. The idea of obtaining the Grail. She would have done this for all eternity if it weren't for Shiro Emiya, the first person she's ever encountered to actually put his life on the line for hers, no matter how stupid he may have been while doing so. Shiro caused her to actually for once slow down and assess the past, helping her realize that the fall of Britain was her fault, but that doesn't mean history needs to change. Saber doesn't actually have to put herself through a cycle of living hell. Instead, there is an actual life to be had if you learn to live with your mistakes. A good life that can only happen because of the mistakes you made in the past. So by the end of Fate 06, Saber chooses to destroy the Holy Grail with Shiro, ending the needless cycle of despair and violence, returning to the moment of her death. This time, she doesn't spend her last seconds on Earth desperately clawing for a chance to start over. Instead, Saber accepts her death as the end to her story. What I just presented to you was one of the most compelling character arcs that Fate has offered me so far. I presented it to you in its rawest form, to show you how the series is capable of genuinely amazing and heartfelt storytelling. I presented it to you like this because this is not how Studio Dean decided to do it. That's because they buried the good storytelling underneath piles of exposition, weird panty jokes, bath sequences, awkward romance stuff, unnecessarily long scenes, lots of cooking, Shiro trauma flashbacks, and whatever else they felt like doing. I had to dig to find any substance to this story, which is a shame because what I was able to fish out of the depths was genuinely good, but that's because it probably was already good in the original visual novel. Why did they make this series at all if you're just gonna do the visual novel, but worse? Don't tell me it was to animate the fights, because we barely cleared that hurdle. Look, I'm not going to sit here and rant about how the animation is horrible in Fate 06 because it's really not, but it isn't good either. You can tell the animators had a really tight budget for how many big fights this series has, so they did what they could to make things work. Still, it doesn't help with the bland story when you have boring action thrown into the mix. The only time the animation itself is entertaining is when you get to witness the glorious CGI dragon. This amalgamation is the single most entertaining thing in the entirety of Fate 06, which I remind you was released in 2006, the same year as the PlayStation 3. How did we go back a decade to Nintendo 64 level of graphics? The funniest thing that this scene actually wasn't in the original visual novel apparently, meaning that they didn't have to do this. While I don't know what happens instead of this in the source material, what constitutes a CGI dragon? This is unironically the only thing I remember Fate 06 for, because I've had to really rack my brain for what happens in this forgettable show to make this video. The only other real redeeming factor that I will give Fate 06 credit for is the soundtrack. It creates this calming atmosphere that can feel almost nostalgic at times, even for me strangely enough, a person who didn't really grow up with anime, much less in the mid-2000s when I was just a baby. But as I mentioned earlier, Fate 06 fails to capitalize on this feeling. In fact, it fails to capitalize on any potential it has at all. It fails to do anything interesting with the lore and world, it fails to make any of the characters likable, and worst of all, it fails to be a good introduction to the Fate franchise, because Fate 06 is just a bad anime. If you recommend the series to newcomers, they're just going to see a boring show, not any of the amazing things that Fate has to offer. Where should they start then? Well, I happen to know the perfect place. I had lied when I said that Studio Dean adapted the Fate Stay Night visual novel, because in reality they only adapted 1/3 of it. Fate Stay Night is a visual novel with 3 completely different routes. The first route is called the Fate route, the one that Studio Dean adapted in 2006. They had plans to adapt the other 2 routes, but those fell through when Fate 06, well, sucked. It wasn't until almost 8 years later would someone finally pick up where Dean left off. A little animation studio by the name of Ufotable, who you may know for the work on the underrated cult classic Demon Slayer. This is where the gloves came off. They aimed to accomplish where all others failed, no more playing around, because it's time for us to talk about the second route that Fate Stay Night has to offer, Unlimited Blade Works. This is where things get good. Going into Unlimited Blade Works, I didn't really understand the idea of the different routes. I had just assumed there was going to be like in games such as Mass Effect, Life is Strange, or Baldur's Gate, with choices you make in your playthrough, like whether you should or shouldn't kill this person, or join one faction over another, changing the story, creating multiple branching paths. No one person's playthrough will be the same because of all the different choices provided. Though as big as these choices may seem, they don't actually affect the story that much, since the developers can't create an entirely new game for every choice. So they have to use little tricks and techniques to make their players think that their decisions are making huge impacts, while reusing as many elements as they can to save time and money. This was my main worry going into Unlimited Blade Works, that it would just be the same thing I already experienced but with only tiny variations. Luckily this was not the case, as not only are each of the Fate Stay Night routes a completely different story from one another, you don't even have the option to play Unlimited Blade Works until you beat the Fate route. That's because each route isn't just a standalone wit of story the author threw in. They are all designed to complement and build upon each other to tell one big cohesive narrative. This might sound a bit confusing, so let me just give you an example of what I mean. In the Fate route of Fate Stay Night, Rin's servant Archer was injured by Saber in their first encounter, causing him to die pretty early on in the story. This kind of sidelined Rin as a character since she couldn't really fight or be of any use. Though that was the purpose, as the Fate route was more or less a love story between Saber and Shiro, so their relationship had to take center stage with no distractions. But in Unlimited Blade Works, Saber not only doesn't injure Archer this time, she gets captured, like a lot, meaning that she is the one who gets sidelined this time. So a special spot in Shiro's heart has a vacancy. Luckily Rin is up to the task. All joking aside, I think that Rin actually works better as a love interest than Saber. Blade Works tells the story of 2 people who, despite being in the worst of circumstances, were still able to slowly cultivate and build a relationship, eventually realizing how much they cared for each other and how much they couldn't live without the other. So Rin and Shiro push through to defeat the evil, and come out the other end smiling hand in hand. this relationship feels so much more natural and real compared to the romance in the Fate route. Sure, all I have really to go off of is the terrible Fate 06 anime, but Shiro and Saber's relationship felt so awkward and contrived. There wasn't really any romance or chemistry between the two. It just feels like they were forced together for story's sake. So I welcome the change in Bladeworks, and the disillusion of the questionable age gap. Another thing that I feel Bladeworks heavily improves on is our protagonist himself, Shiro Emiya. As I mentioned earlier, I despised Shiro in the Fate route. Specifically the way the story presented his strange ideals of wanting to save everyone else at the cost of his own life, not really stopping to consider whether his sacrifice was necessary at all. What I love about Bladeworks is that it doesn't choose to change this about Shiro, but instead criticizes him in the form of Archer. As I mentioned earlier, all servants in Fate's Stay Night are people from any point in history who are reincarnated in the modern day. Often the first thing they do when summoned is tell their master their true identity, though this isn't the case with Archer, as due to a botched summoning on Rin's part, he has no memory of his former self, making his identity a mystery. Archer has an almost childlike cynicism to him, where he often refuses to go along with others, help people in need, and only does things that benefit him. He goes even so far as to betray Rin by becoming another master's servant, for the reason that he would have a higher chance of obtaining the Holy Grail, as Archer puts it. But this is only a lie. In actuality, he switched sides so he could do one thing: kill his past self. In the Fate route, Archer died long before he could discover his identity, but in Bladeworks, he sticks around to uncover it. That identity being one Shiro Emiya. It's heavily implied that in an alternate universe, Shiro failed to save Saber in the Fate route. While it's never been explicitly stated what caused this, Hinoko Nasu has stated in interviews that it's because something was missing from the specific timeline. Whatever it was, it made Shiro commit his life to carry on his father's failed dream of becoming a hero of justice. So he makes a pact with the greater will of the Fate universe to become a heroic spirit, hoping that this way he can save as many people as possible. Unfortunately, he is only in for a rude awakening. For possibly centuries, the only thing that the greater will did was send Shiro to extremely important times in history, to slaughter thousands of human lives without reason. Over time, Shiro slowly realized that he was just a glorified janitor, only cleaning up humanity's never-ending amount of messes by killing whoever he was told. He came to the conclusion that all his self-sacrifice was worthless, that being a hero of justice was nothing more than a childish dream. The ideals that he clung to for so long were never truly his, just baseless ones he borrowed from his father, and just like with his father, those ideals betrayed him, and Shiro now only sees his life as one big pile of regret. So he felt that the only way he could possibly atone for his sins was to become Archer, to go back in time to the fateful Holy Grail War as a servant, with the intent to kill his past self, so he can be erased from existence alongside all of the horrible things he's done. But when he goes back, Archer loses all of his memory of who he is and his goal of killing Shiro. This allows him to unknowingly view his past life without bias. He still comes to the conclusion that Shiro is on a self-destructive path, but there is one thing that changes his mind, that being Rin. She repeatedly detests Shiro's bad habits and reckless belief in his childish ideals. Luckily, Shiro listens. Unlike before, he is a lot more thoughtful about the choices he makes, and how they will affect him and those around him. Now with Rin at his side, Shiro won't have to borrow somebody else's flawed ideals. Instead, he can forge ahead to find his own way of being a hero of justice. I think that the thing that was missing from Archer's timeline, the thing that wasn't there so he became Archer in the first place, isn't some strange, arbitrary lore answer. He didn't have somebody that cared for him enough to call out his faults. He didn't have somebody who could support him through the hardest times in his life. He didn't have someone to live for other than his ideals. In short, I don't think that he had Rin. That's why by the end of Bladeworks, Archer abandons his goal of killing Shiro, giving him a chance to find his own way, a chance that Archer didn't have. It also instills Archer with hope for his future, because he realizes that he doesn't have to be defined by his past sins. Instead, he can forge a better future however he sees fit. While sure, I still hate the Studio Dean Fate adaptation with a burning passion, I honestly don't regret watching it anymore, because if I didn't, I wouldn't have appreciated Archer and Shiro's arc in Bladeworks nearly as much, since I never would have gotten to see Shiro's self-destructive tendencies on full display. But still, I think that the Fate 06 anime could have done better on every single front, especially representing the other players in the Holy Grail War. In Fate 06, there was a very clearly defined good versus evil in the story. That being, if you aren't these 4 people, well, sucks to suck, you were the most evil scum on planet Earth. I hated this since it made every single villain feel more like a monster of the week plot device. There would be some strange occurrence happening around Fuyuki, our gang goes to investigate, turns out it's another master/servant doing bad things, who would have guessed. Our gang defeats said master/servant with the power of friendship, they all go home, force Sakura to cook them a nice warm meal, the end. Though in Blade Works, things are much different. It shows that the Holy Grail War isn't just some simple black and white, good versus evil ordeal. Instead, there aren't any good guys or bad guys in this war, just people. People with their own ideals, wishes, and dreams for the Holy Grail. This made me care for all of the characters in Fate Stay Night, characters who I didn't give a crap about before like Caster, Kuzuki, Lancer, Assassin, and Berserker. That's because they were all given the same treatment that Archer was this time around, with almost entire episodes to flesh out their backstory. Instead of just dying out of nowhere this time around, they were all given proper character arcs with a complete start and satisfying finish. No character I feel represents this more than Ilya Irisvale. In Fate 06, Ilya felt like a shoo-in for marketing reasons, so that they could sell merchandise by having a cute little girl character since she was just kind of there, only serving as a minor antagonist, then sticking around to constantly call Shiro Big Brother for some reason in an annoying voice. So you can imagine my utter excitement when Ilya reappeared in Blade Works, acting exactly the same as she did before. As the series would go on, we would slowly get to learn more and more about Ilya, with the big reveal being that she isn't actually a human at all, but a homunculus, a creature born through magic with the sole purpose of being a vessel for the Holy Grail. So despite her appearance, she is actually 18 years old, having spent her entire life locked up in the Einsburns castle, with no friends or family to keep her company, essentially just a lamb being fattened up for the slaughter. Though right before the Holy Grail War, she was sent to Japan to participate in it, giving her for once a true taste of freedom. You would think that in this route, Ilya gets to live happily ever after like she does in Fate 06. But no, instead she gets brutally murdered. So brutally that I don't think I can even show it on YouTube. I was surprised when this happened, not because it was a diversion of my expectations, but because I was surprised the anime actually got me to care about Ilya and be sad when she died. Saying that Unlimited Blade Works character writing is better than Fate 06's is doing Blade Works a disservice, because that is not a high bar to clear at all. Instead, I feel that its character writing is amazing in its own merit, and now I can see why Fate as a franchise is revered by many, but I still do have to give it my criticisms, that being mainly directed towards Kirei Kotomine and Gilgamesh. These two serve as the main antagonists of both the Fate and Blade Works route, and I honestly think that the story suffers for it. I was hoping that they too would be given the same treatment that everyone else was in Blade Works, by being fleshed out so they could be something more than just dudes who are evil for evil's sake. Sadly, that never happened, and for the most part they stayed completely the same. No crazy backstory, no shocking twist, no interesting character development. They are just boring characters with no rhyme or reason to them. I feel that a lot of people will say that since Unlimited Blade Works is a story about how everyone is morally gray, we need plainly evil characters for everybody to unite against, and I can see that. But I still feel like just about anything could have been given to Kirei and Gilgamesh to make them just a tiny bit more compelling. But I digress. Unlimited Blade Works still did a wonderful job in every single department I could have hoped it had, especially the animation. There is a reason why Unlimited Blade Works has the nickname Unlimited Budget Works, because the animation isn't just better than Fate 06 by a far cry. It's one of the best animated shows I've ever seen. While I wouldn't say that it surpasses a lot of modern series, when it was released in 2014, it was considered groundbreaking, and I can see why. Ufotable are known for their use of CGI to create dynamic camera movement that no other studio has been able to reproduce, almost a decade later. It is found all over Blade Works, and I'm not just talking about the fights, as the hyper-detailed character drawings and backgrounds are always stunning to look at. Combine the animation with all of the story strengths, and you have the perfect jumping on point for newcomers who are interested in the series. Since Ufotable knew that nobody had watched Studio Dean's piss poor attempt, they explain all of the basics and stuff that you need to know in less than an episode, meaning that newcomers can get to the good stuff right away. Though I will admit, after I finished Unlimited Blade Works, I was getting a little tired of Fate Stay Night, especially since I thought that the third and final route of the visual novel would just be more of the same. I mean, come on, where could this story possibly go? We already explored and fleshed out all of its characters and world. It couldn't possibly have anything else interesting left up its sleeve, right? I could not have been more wrong if I tried. While both the Fate and Unlimited Blade Works routes of Fate Stay Night serve as their own stories to be enjoyed on their own, they also serve a different purpose that can only be fulfilled if you experience them in order. What I mean by this is we can see that the third route starts off pretty normal. We get the classic beginning fight with Archer and Lancer, which we've already seen twice, so to be honest, I'm getting a little bored. Lancer's dead? Already? Just like that? Well, I guess we skip to Caster. Oh, she's dead too, and right at the start. Wait, then are we moving on to Gilgamesh then? He just got one-shotted? Already? What the first two routes of Fate Stay Night are supposed to do is build up your expectations, to the point where you think that you know what is going to happen next. That's when Heaven's Field busts down your door and obliterates said expectations with a sledgehammer, such as having a sort of protagonist switch from Shiro Emiya to Sakura Mato. You can't help but feel bad for Sakura never being able to graduate from "you're like a sister to me" status in Shiro's eyes. Out of all the three love interests, she's the most sweet and innocent, always being there to care for anyone in need. Though in Heaven's Feel it's revealed that Sakura's family life is much more harrowing than her persona would lead you to believe. It's revealed that she is actually Rin's younger sister and was born into the Tosaka family. Though another powerful mage family, the Matos, were lacking an heir who could use magic. Somebody they could trust to carry the Mato name into the next generation. Desperate for a solution, Zoken Mato made a proposition to Sakura's father. Sakura's father was a cruel man who only ever saw people, even his own daughters, as monetary gain. Since Sakura was the youngest sibling, she could never hope to take over the Tosaka family. Her father feared that Sakura would one day grow to detest Rin as heir, creating competition and turmoil for the oh-so-great Tosaka family. So when Zoken offered to foster her up to be the inheritor of the Mato family, Sakura's father jumped at the chance. When she was just 6 years old, Sakura was sold off against her will to a different home and to a different family, told to pretend like her past never happened. Sakura felt that she just had to sit there and take it, since she was too weak to retaliate. To make matters worse, Zoken was not truthful in his intentions, as he never meant to turn her into an heir. He meant to turn her into a living holy grail. For her entire life, Sakura was used by Zoken however he saw fit, as he experimented by putting any number of horrible things inside her body. Again, Sakura felt that the only option was to accept it, since she was too weak to retaliate. The entire time this was happening, Sakura's adoptive brother, Shinji Mato, watched with jealousy. He was born without magical powers, seen as a stain on the Mato family's reputation and the reason why Zoken had to look elsewhere to find a mage. So Shinji would often take out his anger on Sakura by abusing her. Heartbreakingly, Sakura felt that her only option was to accept it, since she was too weak to retaliate. The only sliver of hope in her dark, miserable life was Shiro. The first choice she ever made on her own was to visit his house after school every day, despite her brother's protests. In her sleep, Sakura unknowingly becomes something known as the Shadow, an ultra-powerful being that begins slaughtering all the other players to absorb their mana. She doesn't realize it until it starts to make her sick. In turn, Shiro realizes too. So he throws aside his dream of becoming a hero of justice, saying that he will do whatever he can to protect Sakura and keep her safe. The first person who's ever promised that to her in her life. But she fears it will be Shiro's downfall, that if he tries to save her, he will only end up dead. So for once, Sakura is taking matters into her own hands. She goes to Zoken Mato with a simple request, that being her death. That way, nobody will get hurt anymore. But when she arrives, Shinji gets angry, pinning her down, attempting to rape her. That's when those dormant powers finally activate. Sakura kills Shinji, letting the dark powers inside of her finally take over. For once, she now has something that she's never had before: strength. She doesn't have to sit there and take all of the pain inflicted on her anymore. Instead, her life is now in her own hands. Though the power in Sakura begins to dilute her thinking, driving her mad for even more strength, and the ultimate way to achieve that is to obtain the Holy Grail. In the end, Shiro and Rin put a stop to her, helping Sakura to come out of her rage and realize that she was never weak at all. As long as she has people that she loves at her side, she won't ever have to suffer again. I can definitely say that Fate Stay Night Heaven's Feel is by far my favorite route in the series, because of how well it was not only able to subvert my expectations, but keep me on the edge of my seat the entire time, with the best storytelling that the series has to offer so far. I think that it's the perfect way to round out my journey, by ending on the highest possible note, so I can give it all the praise it deserves. But the story wasn't the only thing that went out with a bang. I have to mention Ufotable's wizardry when it came to the animation this time around. Instead of being adapted in the form of a 26-episode series like every other route before it, Ufotable decided that Heaven's Feel would work best as a movie trilogy. That way they wouldn't have to water down the mature tone and content to please the TV ratings board. I think that the results are able to speak for themselves, because they really took the time to make sure this route felt distinct from the rest. But where they really go overboard this time around is the action. As I mentioned earlier, the fights in Fate Stay Night were considered groundbreaking for the time, and while they still look great, they've lost a little bit of their magic nowadays, with how much Ufotable has improved in the decades since. Though the same could not be said for Heaven's Feel, as it is, in my opinion, the best anime the studio has ever produced. Yes, even surpassing Demon Slayer. While fights like Lancer vs Assassin, Saber Alter vs Berserker, and Saber Alter vs Rider don't have as many flashy effects as other series, they have technique. While all of Demon Slayer's fights can be chalked up to just two dudes swinging their sword around at random, every fight in Heaven's Feel is a calculated dance. Both parties involved using every single one of their special abilities to the fullest, not holding back anything in this life or death matter. I would like to say that I can't wait to see what else Ufotable has in the works for the Fate series, but this sadly seems to be their last entry. I would love for them to go back and adapt the Fate route, so I can wash the taste of Studio Dean's dumpster fire out of my mouth. Though that seems unlikely, as they are moving on to other things. Still though, I'm happy for the work that the animators have done for the Fate franchise, as without them, I highly doubt the series would be nearly as popular as it is here in the West, and I probably would have never been able to experience all the amazing things it has to offer. My journey through Fate Stay Night is one that I will never forget, and one that I'm sad is coming to a close. Though I'm finally glad that I will be able to see what else the Fate franchise has to offer. Though, to be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed with all my choices. So you Fate fans who are watching the video, tell me in the comments where you think I should start next, because I really want to keep making videos about this series. That's all I have for now, but hopefully we can reconvene in the future. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.
Like this, put your hands up, love the moment even from dusk, yo, you always got my back, and of course